In this video, I'm going to apply the final material in the scene, which is the material that is applied to the stitching. So I'm going to scroll down to the bottom of the shader tree, where I can see there's two separate stitch materials, and that's because I've got two separate areas with stitching. I have this stitching here around the front panel and also some more stitching on the rear panel. So what I'll do is I'll expand both of these materials and I'll select the material in the first instance and right click on it and create an instance of it, which I'll drag into the other material group above the original material so that it overrides it. And that means that any changes I make in this material will automatically be propagated into the instance. And with that done, I can now start changing the properties of the material. So the first thing to do is to change the shading model to principled. And next I'll increase the roughness to 90% and also increase the sheen to 100% and the sheen tint to 100%. Then I'll open my images panel and I'm going to select my color palette image, so I have it open for reference. Reselect the material in the shader tree. I'll click on the diffuse color to open the color picker and I'll drag the color picker to pin it. And the color I'd like to use on the stitches is this yellow accent color, which I've already saved as a preset, so I'll simply click on the preset in the preset list. With that done, I can dismiss the color picker and close the images panel. Then I'll switch to preview and take a look at a preview render. And I can see that the material properties have been applied to both sets of stitches at the front and the rear. So the shading and texturing part of the process is now complete. There's just one final little bit of cleanup to do, which is to ensure that the shoe fabric is also applied on the inside of these holes. So if I hold Shift and zoom right in to one of the holes, I'm just going to click on this inner material and that's going to select it in the shader tree. Then I'll also just click in preview on the shoe material itself to locate that in the shader tree, and holding Control, I'm going to select everything else that's inside the group. I'm going to right click and create an instance of all of those materials and just drag them into that inner material, which will then be applied to the inside of the holes. Then I can hold Shift and use my scroll wheel to zoom out and take a look at my final result. So the goal of shading and texturing is obviously to try and create realistic materials, and that means that each material must react to light in a believable way. Metals need to be highly reflective, the plastic needs to have a certain amount of glossiness, whereas the rubber should have very little glossiness and a high level of roughness. The fabrics also need to have a high level of roughness and also some sheen to create the retro reflection. But the other thing that's important is that your materials need to be able to stand up to scrutiny when you zoom in close to them. So if I hold Shift and use my scroll wheel to zoom in on the front of the shoe, we should be able to take a closer look at the fabric, the suede, the plastic and the rubber. And that is why I've added this very fine bump map on the fabric of the shoe and done the same on the suede, and also added a tiny bit of fur just to create that extra little bit of detail. But shading and texturing is only half the story, and even though the materials are reacting to light in a realistic way, there's still quite a lot I can do in order to make this image look a lot better. Because although the materials are well crafted, the lighting still needs a lot of work. And that's because I was using very basic lighting just while I was working on the texturing. However, for the final render, I'm going to need to create lighting that's much more exciting and that also really brings out the properties of the materials in a more obvious way. And that's what I'll be looking at in the next section of this tutorial.